If you've ever felt overwhelmed by noise, drained by superficial conversations, or out of place in a world that moves too fast, this is not a flaw. It may be a sign of depth. Sensitive people often grow up believing something is wrong with them. They feel too much, notice too much, think too deeply. In a world that rewards speed, certainty, and surface-level interaction, sensitivity is often mislabeled as fragility. But Carl Jung saw sensitivity very differently. He believed that some individuals are naturally oriented toward depth. Their psyche is not built to skim reality. It is built to enter it. Sensitive people perceive undercurrents. They feel emotional atmospheres. They sense meaning beneath words. This depth makes shallow environments exhausting. Small talk feels hollow. Constant stimulation feels invasive. Performative confidence feels false. Not because sensitive people are antisocial, but because their inner world is rich, symbolic, and slow. Jung believed that modern society privileges a persona, the social mask, over the inner life. Success is often measured by appearance, productivity, and certainty rather than reflection, feeling, or insight. Sensitive individuals struggle not because they lack resilience, but because they are asked to live against their nature. They are pressured to simplify what they experience deeply, to harden where they are open, to move quickly where they need meaning. Over time, this creates tension. You may feel misunderstood without being mistreated, lonely without being alone, tired without being overworked. This struggle is not accidental. It is a clash between depth and superficiality. And for sensitive people, this clash becomes the central challenge of life. To understand why sensitive people struggle in a shallow world, we must first understand what shallow really means. Shallow does not mean unintelligent. It does not mean immoral. It does not even mean unkind. In Jungian terms, a shallow environment is one that lives almost entirely in the persona. The persona, as described by Carl Jung, is the social mask we wear to function in society. It is necessary. It allows us to communicate, work, and belong. But when a culture over-identifies with persona, something vital is lost. Depth in a persona-dominated world. Speed is rewarded over reflection. Certainty is valued over curiosity. Appearance is prioritized over meaning. For most people, this feels normal. For sensitive people, it feels unbearable. Sensitive individuals are not oriented towards surface interaction. Their nervous system and psyche are tuned to subtlety. They notice tone shifts, emotional undercurrents, contradictions between words and feeling. They feel atmosphere, not just information. In shallow environments, this sensitivity becomes overstimulated. There's too much noise with too little meaning. Too many interactions without emotional truth. Too much performance and too little presence. This creates a constant internal strain. The sensitive person is processing far more than is required. Not because they choose to, but because they cannot not. Their psyche does not filter out depth. So when conversations revolve around status, appearances, trends, or empty productivity, sensitive people feel a quiet dissonance. Something feels off, not intellectually, but existentially. They may leave social situations feeling drained, even if nothing negative happened. They may finish a workday exhausted, even if the tasks were simple. This exhaustion is not physical. It is psychic. Jung believed that energy is depleted when the psyche is forced to operate against its natural orientation. Sensitive people are inwardly reflective, symbolic, and meaning-driven. Shallow environments demand constant outward focus, simplification, and emotional compression. Over time, this mismatch creates fatigue, but the fatigue is often misunderstood. Sensitive people may blame themselves. They think they are weak, socially anxious, too introverted. But the real issue is not capacity. It is incompatibility. The shallow world does not ask sensitive people to contribute their depth. It asks them to suppress it. They are expected to speak quickly instead of thoughtfully, to simplify complex feelings into slogans, to ignore what they sense beneath the surface. This suppression requires energy, and energy spent suppressing the self is never replenished. This is why sensitive people often feel a strange relief when they're alone. Solitude allows their psyche to return to its natural rhythm. Thoughts slow down. Emotions settle. Meaning reemerges. They are not avoiding people. They are recovering from distortion. Jung warned that when a person lives too long in a world that does not reflect their inner nature, neurosis can develop. For sensitive people, this often appears as anxiety, depression, or a chronic sense of alienation, not because they are broken, but because they are unmirrored. They do not see themselves reflected in the values of the culture around them. Depth has no language there. This is why sensitive people often gravitate toward art, music, philosophy, psychology, and spirituality. These are not hobbies. They are refuges. Places where depth is allowed to exist without apology. Places where slowness is not punished. Where complexity is not reduced. Where feeling is not inconvenient. Without these spaces, the sensitive psyche begins to starve. And starvation looks like withdrawal. You may find yourself pulling back from conversations that feel empty, avoiding environments that feel loud but hollow, losing interest in goals that once felt important. This is not apathy. It is the summon emerging unconsciously. Your psyche is protecting itself from dilution. Jung believed that when the outer world becomes too shallow, the psyche turns inward. This inward turn is often misunderstood as isolation or disengagement, but it is actually self-preservation. Sensitive people struggle in a shallow world because they are asked to live in two incompatible realities at once, one that demands surface and one that needs depth. This tension cannot be resolved by trying harder. It can only be resolved by understanding oneself. And that understanding is where transformation begins. One of the greatest misunderstandings about sensitive people is the belief that they are simply overwhelmed. Overwhelmed by emotion, overwhelmed by life, overwhelmed by stress. But what sensitive people experience is not overwhelm in the usual sense. It is awareness without adequate structure. According to Carl Jung, the psyche is not overwhelmed by depth. It is overwhelmed by unintegrated depth. When awareness expands faster than understanding, tension appears. Sensitive people perceive more than they can immediately make sense of. They notice contradictions between what people say and what they feel. They sense emotional undercurrents beneath ordinary situations. They intuit meaning before it becomes conscious. This is not emotional chaos. It is psychological perception. The problem arises because modern culture offers very few tools to help sensitive people contain what they perceive. Instead, they are told to toughen up, to ignore their feelings, to not overthink. This advice misunderstands the issue completely. Sensitive people do not overthink. They overperceive. They are receiving more data, emotional, symbolic, psychological, than most environments are designed to handle. When awareness is no container, it spills over as anxiety, not because something is wrong, but because something is unprocessed. Jung believed that consciousness expands in stages. When new layers of perception open, the psyche must reorganize itself. Until this happens, awareness feels overwhelming. This is why sensitive people often feel emotionally flooded. They are not weak. They are early. They are encountering psychological material that others remain unconscious of. And consciousness without meaning is exhausting. Sensitive people may feel emotions that are not clearly theirs. They may carry moods that do not belong to them. They may feel disturbed by things others barely notice. This does not mean they lack boundaries. It means their boundaries have not yet been consciously developed. In Jungian terms, sensitivity without integration leads to participation mystique, a state where the individual unconsciously merges with the emotional field around them. The world enters them faster than they can differentiate it. This is why shallow environments are particularly draining. There's too much stimulus with too little reflection, too much interaction with too little processing. The sensitive psyche absorbs everything, but has no space to metabolize it. This leads to symptoms that are often misdiagnosed. Anxiety is interpreted as fragility. Withdrawal is interpreted as depression. Need for solitude is interpreted as antisocial behavior. But these are not disorders. They are signals. Signals that awareness has outgrown the environment supporting it. Jung warned that societies often pathologize individuals who carry emerging consciousness. Those who sense deeper patterns before the collective is ready are often labeled as unstable rather than insightful. Sensitive people are often ahead of their time, not in intelligence, but in perception. They feel the cracks before they are visible. They sense emptiness before it is named. They recognize superficiality before it becomes obvious. But this awareness comes at a cost. Until it is integrated, it feels heavy. You may find yourself emotionally exhausted after ordinary interactions. You may feel confused by your own reactions. You may feel like you are too much for the world, or that the world is too little for you. Neither is true. The issue is not emotion. It is orientation. Sensitive people are not meant to eliminate their awareness. They are meant to understand it, structure it, and eventually embody it. Jung believed that when awareness is integrated, it becomes wisdom rather than overwhelm. But before that happens, there is a long middle phase, a phase where you feel exposed, where everything feels loud, where meaning is sensed but not yet articulated. This phase is uncomfortable, but necessary. It is the psyche learning how to hold depth without drowning in it. Sensitive people struggle not because they feel too much. They struggle because they feel deeply in a world that has forgotten how to make sense of depth. One of the most painful aspects of being sensitive in a shallow world is not the exhaustion. It is the misunderstanding. Sensitive people are rarely met as they are. They are interpreted, and interpretation often distorts depth. According to Carl Jung, societies tend to misunderstand individuals who do not fit dominant psychological norms. When a culture values efficiency, certainty, and outward success, inward-oriented people appear strange, impractical, or fragile. Sensitivity does not translate well in a language built for surfaces. A sensitive person pauses before speaking and is labeled insecure. They reflect deeply and are labeled indecisive. They feel emotional nuance and are labeled dramatic. None of these labels capture what is actually happening. What is happening is inner complexity. Sensitive people do not respond immediately because they are processing multiple layers at once. They are listening not only to words, but to tone, context, emotion, and contradiction. In shallow environments, this depth is inconvenient. It slows things down. It questions assumptions. It exposes emotional truth beneath social performance. So the environment adapts by minimizing the sensitive person, not intentionally, but reflexively. Jung believed that when a quality threatens a dominant attitude of a group, it is often reclassified as a flaw. This allows the group to preserve its self-image without having to change. Depth threatens speed. Reflection threatens certainty. Sensitivity threatens emotional denial. So sensitive people are often told to toughen up, simplify, or stop thinking so much. This advice is not neutral. It asks them to amputate a core part of themselves. Over time, many sensitive individuals internalize these messages. They begin to doubt their perception. They second-guess their feelings. They mistrust their intuition. This creates inner conflict. One part of them senses truth. Another part fears being wrong, dramatic, or difficult. The split is exhausting. Jung described this as alienation from the self, a condition where the individual lives according to external definitions rather than inner reality. For sensitive people, this alienation can feel especially painful because their inner life is rich, alive, and meaningful, yet rarely recognized. They may feel invisible even when seen, misheard even when listened to, alone even when surrounded. This is why sensitive people often retreat, not because they dislike others, but because being misunderstood repeatedly erodes the psyche. Withdrawal becomes a form of protection. In solitude, they no longer have to translate themselves. They no longer have to compress meaning into acceptable shapes. They no longer have to defend their way of being. But withdrawal has its cost too. Without conscious integration, solitude can turn into isolation. Sensitive people may begin to believe they simply do not belong anywhere, that they are fundamentally incompatible with the world. This belief is dangerous because it mistakes cultural mismatch for personal failure. Jung warned that when individuals identify too strongly with the labels placed upon them, they risk shrinking their true nature to fit a distorted image. Sensitive people are especially vulnerable to this because they take feedback seriously. They reflect on it. They internalize it, sometimes too deeply. But sensitivity is not meant to disappear. It is meant to mature. The misunderstanding you have faced is not evidence that your depth is wrong. It is evidence that depth has few mirrors in a shallow culture. And without mirrors, even the most valuable qualities can begin to feel like burdens. This is why the journey of the sensitive person is not about becoming less sensitive. It is about becoming self-defined, learning to trust your perception even when it is not validated, learning to name your experience without apology, learning to recognize when misunderstanding is not your responsibility. This is not arrogance. It is psychological survival, and it is a necessary step before sensitivity can transform from vulnerability into strength. Sensitivity becomes strength only when it is integrated. Until then, it feels like exposure. According to Carl Jung, any psychological capacity that remains unconscious is experienced as fate. For sensitive people, this means that depth, when unintegrated, controls them rather than serves them. They feel everything, but do not yet know how to hold what they feel. Integration begins when sensitivity stops being something that happens to you and becomes something you relate to consciously. This is a crucial shift. Instead of being overwhelmed by emotion, you begin to observe it. Instead of absorbing atmosphere, you begin to name it. Instead of drowning in depth, you begin to navigate it. Jung believed this shift marks the transition from participation to containment. The sensitive person stops merging with the world and starts standing within it. This does not make them colder. It makes them anchored. Integration teaches a sensitive person discernment. You begin to notice what is truly yours and what you have been carrying unconsciously for others. You learn that not every emotion you feel requires action. Not every tension needs resolution. Not every depth needs expression. This realization is liberating. For the first time, sensitivity stops feeling like an open wound and begins to feel like perception. You are no longer at the mercy of your awareness. You are using it. Jung emphasized that awareness without ego strength leads to suffering, but awareness combined with structure becomes wisdom. This structure does not come from suppression. It comes from boundaries. Boundaries are not walls. They are containers. They allow depth to exist without spilling everywhere. As this happens, something remarkable occurs. Your sensitivity becomes selective. You still feel deeply, but not indiscriminately. You begin to choose where your depth goes, who has access to it, when it is shared. This choice changes everything. You no longer feel exhausted after every interaction. You no longer feel invaded by noise and emotion. You no longer feel compelled to explain your inner world to those who cannot meet it. Your depth begins to radiate instead of leak. People may start responding to you differently. Some will feel calmer around you. Others will feel uneasy because integrated depth has presence. It is quiet but unmistakable. Jung believed that when a person integrates their natural orientation, they embody inner authority. This authority is not dominance. It is coherence. Your words carry weight because they come from reflection. Your silence carries meaning because it is not empty. Your sensitivity no longer apologizes for itself. This is when depth becomes strength, not because the world suddenly values it, but because you do. You stop seeking permission to be as you are. You stop asking shallow spaces to validate deep experience. You understand now that sensitivity was never meant to help you survive the shallow world. It was meant to help you see through it. This realization does not isolate you. It clarifies you. You begin to recognize which environments nourish you and which ones erode you. You stop blaming yourself for needing depth. You stop forcing yourself to function in places that deny meaning. And slowly, carefully, you begin to build a life that can hold who you actually are. This is not escape. It is alignment. Living with depth in a shallow world does not mean withdrawing from life. It means choosing how you engage with it. According to Carl Jung, psychological maturity is not about rejecting the world, but about relating to it without losing oneself. Sensitive people are not meant to harden. They are meant to differentiate. You learn that not every environment deserves your depth. Not every conversation requires your full presence. Not every relationship is meant to access your inner world. This is not avoidance. It is discernment. You stop trying to make shallow spaces meaningful. You stop explaining your sensitivity to those who cannot understand it. You stop translating your inner life into forms that feel false. Instead, you reserve your depth for what can meet it. This changes your relationship with the world. You participate, but selectively. You engage, but consciously. You give, but without self-erasure. Jung believed that when a person lives in alignment with their nature, life regains a quiet sense of rightness. You may still feel the pain of superficiality, but it no longer defines you. You build pockets of meaning, moments of silence, relationships that honor reflection. Your sensitivity no longer seeks approval. It seeks truth. You understand now that the world may remain shallow, but you do not have to become so to survive in it. Depth was never meant to be common. It was meant to be lived. And when you accept this, the struggle softens. You stop asking why you are different. You stop wishing you were less. You begin honoring what you are. Sensitive people are not here to dominate the world. They are here to remember it, to bring meaning where it is thinned, to hold space where it has vanished, to see what others rush past. This is not a burden. It is a responsibility, but only when carried consciously. When lived unconsciously, depth hurts. When lived consciously, it heals. You no longer feel out of place everywhere. You feel at home within yourself. And that is enough. Thank you for listening. Until next time, take care of what is truly yours.